Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here today at another one of our fireside chats. Um, Today, we're going to be talking about product market fit with Oyin, who comes from Lagos, Nigeria. She is the managing director of Techstar Lagos, and we have the pleasure of having her around today. We've had a wonderful discussion a second ago, which we're going to start talking about again now. First of all, I think it would be easier if you just introduce yourself for a second.
Oyin Solebo, Managing Director at Techstars. So I'm sure all of you know, but Techstars is the most active pre-seed investor in the world. We have 54 accelerator programs across the world, and I run currently our only program in Africa, which is in Nigeria. I started my career, so I was born and bred in the UK, as you can probably tell by the accent, but I'm Nigerian by heritage. So I started my career back in 2005 in investment banking, where I worked at Goldman Sachs for about 4 years. I spent a year in strategy consulting for a European consulting firm called Roland Berger, where I was offshooted into Nigeria for a year, which was my first opportunity to actually live and work in Africa. I went back into investment management for a while before becoming a founder. So for 8 years, I was the co-founder and COO of a company called Move Me Back, which was it still exists. It's a curated LinkedIn for Africa where we were connecting the world to African opportunities. And then last year, I joined Techstars as the managing director for the Lagos-based program.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to start in a slightly different way. I'm going to talk about movies. Every single one of us, when we go to watch a movie, we see it with our own eyes, which are completely different from others. We're talking about Founder, the film about the person who founded McDonald's. So I was thinking of it like, my kids will want to take me to McDonald's if we watch this movie together because they're big fans. You were watching this from a product market fit perspective.
Yeah.
So I guess you take work home. What did you see in that movie that brought you into product market fit?
Yeah. Has anyone seen that movie, Founder? Okay. So I was watching it on the plane on the way here, and I completely geeked out. It's probably not very cool, but I loved it. There's like a 10-minute scene which I would advise any startup watches. So there's a scene where the founders essentially, in my words, talk about how they achieve product market fit. They're just talking about their journey. So for anyone that knows the founders of McDonald's, I think they started off trying to tap into Hollywood just before recession broke. So it was a recession, people didn't have money. What are people still spending money on? They're still spending money on food. So they went into the fast food industry. And it was a time where drive-ins were a big thing. So, people driving their car up to go and get food. They wanted to go into this industry because they could see that it would make money. But one of the things that they saw or felt was that the customers was really undesirable. So the customer that you typically have in a drive-in is young. They don't spend a lot of money, they're a bit messy, they're just not the kind of customer you want to have for long-term value. So they went about trying to create a new form of fast food, and it just goes through the different journeys that they went through. So first of all, it talks about how they kind of got rid of that young customer. First of all, they spoke about what they were serving. So they started off serving something like 12 different products. Dozens, 20-something different products. But they looked at their metrics, and they found that actually something like 85% of the sales were just in 3 products. It was in the burgers, it was in the chips, and it was in the drinks. So they got rid of everything else. They just focused on what the customer actually wanted. Because they were able to focus on a smaller number of products, they were also able to have a smaller operations. So there's a clip of them driving chopping their physical premises in half and driving it to a new location where they saw there are more customers. And then it talks about how they made their production line really, really efficient, and how essentially they had loads of tests to make sure that this production line was efficient. So what they did is they went to a tennis court, and they drew out the size of their kitchen. And then they would draw out where the people in the kitchen would be. So, this person's here making drinks, this person's here making milk, making fries, making hamburgers. And they would get all of their staff in, and mock walking around the operations to see whether or not it was efficient. And over the space of a day, they had something like 20 different permutations of this. So they'd get out some water, scrub it off, draw it out again, have people doing different things until they achieved a really efficient production line. And that for me was just an amazing example of doing a whole load of different experiments until you find something that works and doing it really cheaply. So yeah, watch it if you get a chance.
We're going to get later into getting into those testings, because there's quite a lot about PMF that goes about testing. First of all, out of the audience, I'd like to ask you a quick question. Out of the founders or startups that are here, I'd like a hands up if you believe that you have achieved product market fit. Okay, let's say that our audience isn't too optimistic. Okay, good. So first of all, many of us see product market fit as a feeling, as a gut feeling. And is there a way to define this, what it is actually? Because we could probably ask to our audience, the people who are saying that they do have PMF, and we'll have completely different answers. Is there like an official answer to this?
I would say there's an official answer. I'd say that people say different things, but I'd say there's commonalities in the official answers that you might get. So, well, you'll get, in terms of the feeling, you'll get people say, if you have to ask, then you don't have it. But you also get, I think, you get a common thread of a feeling around you just have so many customers without you needing to spend money on acquisition, marketing, sales. And you don't have any time to work on your product because all you're focused on is getting, you're nodding, okay, you're saying, yeah, I got that. All you're working on is trying to get these limited products that you have in the hands of an increasing, demanding consumer. So you have got a clear customer who loves your product and is consuming and paying for it in an explosive way. So it feels explosive, it feels unsustainable, but it also kind of feels like everything you're doing is right because the customers just keep on buying it without you needing to do any acquisition.
That's not the normal stage in a startup life?
No, that is very difficult for startups to achieve, and very few startups actually do achieve product market fit. So, you know, if you just Google why do startups fail, the top answer is typically because they essentially don't have product market fit. They build a product that customers actually don't want and don't want sustainably. Mm-hmm. So it is something that is super tricky to achieve, and it's something that you have to spend a lot of time in. So if you think of like the startup journey, you go from idea stage, you've got a hunch that there's a problem. Ideally, you then do some customer discovery. You're speaking to customers, figuring out what they want. Maybe you then build an MVP, a minimal viable product. You launch it, you gain some traction, and then you start to monetize it. All of that is a desperate search for product market fit. And it's only really when you're at the growth stage where customers are continuing to buy your product, you don't even have time to think about the product, every penny that you get raised is going into growth, that you really have achieved product market fit.
And before, let's say that's aspirational. Let's try to get there. How do we get there? Is there a path or a defined method to get to that product market fit in an orderly way or in a short way if possible?
Yeah, sure. So there's a typical cycle that startups will typically go through to achieve product market fit. So you start with your idea, you start with your hunch, and then the first thing you want to do is that customer discovery piece. So that is the piece where you're going out and challenging your assumptions, asking a lot of questions to even see, is there a big problem here? Is there a big customer that has this problem? And is the customer actually willing to do something about it? Because a lot of people say, I don't like this, but I don't care about it enough to actually do anything about it or even pay for it. So the first part is customer discovery. The next part is the build. And it really is about trying to find cheap and fast ways to take something to market, to put something in the hands of the consumer. Because you don't have time, you don't have capital, and the most expensive way to test what really is just a hypothesis at the moment, it's just an idea, is to build a fully fledged product. So you've got this build stage where you're constantly doing experiments, like the McDonald's thing you're not building, you're on the tennis court drawing out what this looks like. You're doing experiments in order to see what actually works, and then you're sending it to market, getting customers to actually use it, and measuring the success of that, and you're constantly going through that loop. So customer, build, test, learn, do it all over again. And that is typically the cycle that startups go through before they achieve product market fit.
And a typical error that we see a lot is that these startups start growing their team
Yes.
before getting there, no? Or hiring people that aren't really prepared for that stage, no?
Yes, absolutely. So you'll hear people say that before you achieve product market fit, you don't want a big team. You want to keep it lean for multiple reasons. One is because it's really expensive to have a team. And the second is because the bigger your team get, the harder it is for the founder, the CEO ideally, to really know everything that's going on, and the harder it is for you to make a change. So I'm sure most people here probably know Clubhouse. Yes, no? Yeah, so Clubhouse, for anyone that doesn't know, Clubhouse launched during COVID, and it was like a social media app but for audio. So you could log in, you could hear a celebrity having a conversation and kind of join that conversation. Really popular, had something like 10 million active users per month, had a valuation of $4 billion. It was like the biggest thing in social media. The minute COVID restrictions started to open up, didn't do so well. But the founders do not blame COVID. What they say is that the team got too big, and there's probably some truth in that, right? The team got so big that they had different product teams and different technical teams, so it was very difficult for them to quickly maneuver to find product market fit. So yeah, absolutely, until you achieve it, the best thing to do is to try and keep your team as lean as possible. And also probably for the CEO to know everything. So I'm sure most of you CEOs, I imagine that a few of you may have been accused of micromanaging your team in the past. Anyone been accused of a micromanager CEO? No? Okay, all right.
That's normally a trend.
Yeah, often they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say it's probably okay, because as a kind of a pre-PMF founder, you need to know everything in your business. And it's difficult for you to do that if you have an expansive team.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. You were talking about a very clear example of non-product market fit with Clubhouse. We see nowadays many big companies come up, big and small companies come up with product that believe are tested and are going to get to product market fit pretty fast, but we have some very popular examples of things that have gone south quite unexpectedly, even in big corporations, no?
Yeah, I think the example we were talking about in the session was Google. So obviously Google, huge success, product lines that have worked really, really well, but they've also got a couple examples of product lines that have not worked so well. So a couple examples. First being Google Glass. Does anyone remember Google Glass? Did anyone buy Google Glass? Is anyone interested in buying Google Glass? Not even interested. What stopped you from buying it?
Product market fit was useless.
It was useless?
Like fancy device, but as a variant, no use cases, no actual value for my real life. So.
And now when you see the Apple VR headset come up, would you buy that one? Or after thinking about this?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Because I know what kind of experiments I would like to set up on top of this to see if this product market fit would be discovered or not first.
So maybe the first mover advantage there wasn't that clear, no? Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah. So I mean, Google Glass I think is a great one. Like it's super cool. Well, it's kind of marketed as super cool technology, but yeah, like what really was the value of you walking around with these glasses where you could see your text messages and the weather and all sorts on your screen? Mm-hmm. They were also coming at a time where there was a proliferation of smart devices. So people already had these tools on their phone or on their TV. So what really was the additional value for $1,500 at the time? It was an incredibly expensive product. So a product that perhaps they developed because it was really exciting and cool technology, but there was no clear user demand for it. And where actually users already had alternatives that they were pretty happy with. The other thing that you see when you talk about product market fit is, does that product build upon an existing behavior already, or are you desperately trying to change behaviors? I mean, here we've got a few people that wear glasses, but the majority don't. So this desperate try to get everyone to wear glasses instead of just looking at their watch, which they probably already have to get all of those features, just didn't really make sense. And that's beyond the actual product not being secure, etc. Just when you just think about, did the customer love it? Did the customer need it? And was it at a price tag that the customer would buy?
That's the other part. But it's not only the price tag. The example also is with social media sites coming up from the big companies, no?
Yes.
With Google as well, no?
Yeah.
Or with Facebook doing their Twitter clone right now.
Yes. Yeah, not always about price. So Google, another example, and I love Google, so I hope it doesn't sound like I'm bashing them, but and they just develop a lot of products, right? So it's easy to find a couple of fails. But the other example is Google+. Did anyone use Google+? Yeah, back in the day, it shows our ages. But Google+ was a product that I really wanted to love because I'm a big Google Suite user. So Google+, for the rest of you, was Google's attempt at a social media app. It basically looked like a really cumbersome Facebook with language that you wouldn't have understood. Like, they had things called circles and I can't remember, just a whole load of different things on the left-hand side, features that you just couldn't understand. It wasn't intuitive. It was built by techies that were probably using it in-house, but it wasn't really built with the customer in mind. They also didn't really make it clear, is it B2B or is it B2C? Really, who is this targeted at? I was trying to use it from a B2B perspective, so I was trying to use it to market my startup at the time, and I wanted to love it, but it was just really, really cumbersome. So yeah, another example of a big company that's had loads of successes, but a few products that didn't achieve product market fit.
Okay, yeah. I'm sure there's a ton of other examples. Going back to asking questions to the audience, in your startups, have you gotten to that moment in which you realize that you have not achieved product market fit and that your product is not going to achieve it, so that you really have to pivot?
How are you? I'm Ibrahim. In our startup, we pivoted 4 times. We are in the 5th one. So we thought that community will be great, and we failed. Educational, and we failed. E-commerce and directory, and we failed. And we found that a lot of our customers do a workaround. So when they know the supplier, they let go the platform and go straight to the contractor. So we are now in a subscription model. We found that if we build a system for contractors to manage their procurement process, and now we have subscribers and they are coming back. So now we benefited from these pivots, and we have a mixed platform now, a SaaS and marketplace, so they can taste the service. We give them a limited access to the system, and if they love it, they subscribe. So we faced this challenge, and now we are having subscribers, and we are trying to reach the product market fit that we have a retained customers. So we faced it.
Okay.
Market, if I can say, it's gotten out. Marketplaces are typically very difficult ones to find product market fit on. And the question that every company needs to ask is, what is that killer feature? What is that killer thing in your product that people are actually using it for? So if you're developing a marketplace where people are ultimately using you to identify the best supplier, great, they're going to use you to identify that supplier, then they're just going to go offline and continue working with that supplier. So then the question becomes, what becomes that magical thing? I think Amazon is actually a really good example of what they early on, what they defined as their magic moment. So what they described as that aha moment that makes a customer be like, okay, I'm going to continue using you versus I'm going to churn and use something else. And for them, it actually wasn't the discovery. I mean, obviously now it probably is, because you can find absolutely anything. But for them, it was actually the seamless delivery. Right, that was the aha moment. That was the point where customers like, damn, I can get this delivered in a couple of days. I'm going to come back. So I think that's actually a great example of that desperate need to figure out what it is, and also the need to kind of ask the customer. Like, because I'm sure perhaps if early on you had done perhaps more customer discovery interviews, right? Customer discovery interviews are really hard to do. But what you want to be able to do is really quickly identify what are your biases. So any founder is going to have biases. Any founder is going to have some assumptions of what they think is going to work. And being a founder is it's a really interesting, I think founders are like the most interesting people in the world, because you've got to have this really weird match of like ridiculous belief in yourself, almost to the point of narcissism, but also the humility to actually take feedback and learn. So that's why customer discovery, I think, is actually really difficult for a lot of founders, because they go into those interviews thinking they know all the answers. But a really good customer discovery interview is, part of it involves writing down all of those assumptions, like being really clear about what are all the things you're taking for granted, the things that you assume, and then making sure that you're asking questions around them openly without leading the interviewee to try and figure out whether or not it's validated or you're actually completely wrong.
There's a great example of that. There's an interview of the founder of Dropbox, in which he explains where everybody he was talking about was telling him that his future product was easily replicable, had no moat, was very easy to clone on Linux, and it was basically a waste of time. And then he always asked at the end of those interviews, yeah, but are you using whatever our competitors are doing? And everybody said no. That was his reason to continue, even though everybody was telling him not to go ahead with Dropbox, which is a multi-billion business today. No? Going back to PMF, how do we measure it? Is there a table? Can we get it on an Excel file, or how does this work?
There are some typical measures that you can use and that an investor might ask you about in their way to try and figure out whether or not you've got product market fit. So the first one is some kind of exponential growth. And you need to find one or maybe two KPIs, key metrics that you are measuring to demonstrate exponential growth. And those metrics need to be related to value in some shape or form, and also related to retention, and not dependent on marketing spend. Because obviously the more money you put in, hopefully you're going to get exponential growth, so it has to be not dependent on marketing spend. Typically it's something related to revenue, but in some cases it might not be. So for example, a social media app, it may be something more like engagement. But for most products, it's something related to revenue. So something like monthly recurring revenue or average revenue per user. And average revenue per user is a really good one, actually, because it will probably demonstrate not only your ability to increase the number of customers that come in, but also your ability to increase the value that each customer is bringing, perhaps through upselling products to that customer. So ARPU, average revenue per user, is a big one. And you want to be able to chart that. You want to be able to have time on your x-axis and whatever that measure is on your y-axis, and show this exponential curve of your growth. So that's the first thing, exponential growth.
Something after would be retention, no, I guess.
Yes, exactly. So retention is the one that you will constantly also be asked for. And retention is some measure of your customers coming back and using you. So it might be you looking at after a number of days how many customers come back, or it might be how often are they resubscribing every month, or if it's a model where they're forced to subscribe, are they churning? Are they cancelling their subscription? And for that, you want to see a decent level of retention. So again, what you probably want to do there is get out a graph, and on one axis you've got time, on another axis you've got your retention measure. And then you start to draw your retention curve. So over time, what does your retention look like? If you don't have product market fit, what you'll see is that over time, you'll start with 100% of your users, but it will keep on going down and down and down and down until you have no users at all. So that's an example of a company with no product market fit.
Mm-hmm.
what you typically actually see with companies that have product market fit is that, yeah, there's a bit of a down because, some people might try and use your product, but it's not a fit. They're just not the right consumer, they're not the right cohort, that's fine. But then it should level off. It should level off at some stage to show that over time there's a cohort of customers that continue buying your product or service, and that's what you want to be able to see. And those are the customers that you really want to tap into. So it might be that you have got retention over a long period of time, like 20%. Only 20% of your customers keep on using you. But you've got 20% from day 30 all the way to day 365. That's actually a demonstration that you've got product market fit, but just for that cohort. So the question is, who is that 20%? What is it that connects them? What product feature are they actually using? And you really want to tap into that. So retention is another measure.
You were talking also, when you're talking about retention, you talk about these tipping points, no? When suddenly something magic happens and clicks, no?
Yeah. So there's this idea of the tipping point. So the idea that a user will use you a certain amount of times and get that aha moment a certain amount of times before they really are just addicted to your product. If you're really lucky, you can figure out what that metric is, what that key metric is that demonstrates your tipping point. So if you research Facebook in the early days, what they found early on is that connecting with 7 friends within 10 days was the tipping point. Once someone did that, they were in, they were addicted. What you want to be able to do is, for that cohort, first of all, find that magic moment, find whatever that aha moment is, and then try and figure out how many times they need to do that magic moment in order to really be retained over a long period of time. And then you want to build strategies around that tipping point. So for example, for Facebook early on, if anyone used it back in 2005, like I did, it would have very quickly asked you to connect with all of your friends at your university. If you use your university email address, it would have pulled in people with the same domain to get you to click with them because they really wanted you to sign up 7 friends within 10 days. That was
7 friends
point.
in 10 days.
Yeah.
And after that,
You're
used
addicted.
to stay.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Another thing that I see a lot is on web pages when you're leaving or when you're there, they come up with this thing where they say, on a scale from 0 to 10, how likely are you to recommend us?
Yes.
And I see that more and more coming in.
Yeah.
What's that about? Is that a way of measuring product market fit also?
Yes, yeah, it is. Although it's a way of, perhaps arguably more of a way of measuring customer experience, but it is typically a measure that someone might assume is related to product market fit. So that's your Net Promoter Score. Does anyone here use Net Promoter Scores? Do you find them useful? Sorry, what did you say? Yeah? Okay, all right. I'm a bit on the fence about Net Promoter Scores, but I'll tell you the theory anyway, because it's something that you might get asked. So Net Promoter Score, as you said, you're asked one question: how likely are you to recommend this product or service to your friend or colleague? Between 0 and 10. If someone scores you between 0 and 6, the idea is that they are a detractor. So not only are they not a great customer, but when they talk about you, they're going to discourage people from using you. You don't want any of those. And then
even if they give you a 6.
Even if they give you a 6.
That's a tough.
Yeah, it's a tough score.
Okay.
And then a 9 to 10 are your promoters. So these are the people who love your product so much that they're going to continue promoting you and just help you build.
And 7 and 8 is like
nothing.
Well, that's tough.
Nothing. So I use it, but this is my concern about Net Promoter Score. I do think that it's very cultural specific. Okay. So for example, and I don't know what it's like here, but in Nigeria, we have this phrase that 10 is for God. Only God can get 10 out of 10. So it's very difficult for someone to score you 10 out of 10, versus I think if you're in the States, they're probably more likely to be like, it's great, 10. Okay. So I think there are some cultural biases with NPS. I think the other challenge with NPS is that you can have a really bad product, but a really great customer experience. And then it might be that you're being scored on your customer experience purely instead of your product. So need to be careful there. Yeah, so I think NPS is one that is often used, but is one that has its challenges.
And then there's another one that many investors use to check out startups, which is LTV divided by CAC.
Yeah, yeah. So has anyone been asked about their LTV versus their CAC? A few, yeah, one, okay. So your LTV, this is your long-term value of each customer. So over a long period of time, how much money do you think you can make for that customer? And it's typically measured by, you look at the average revenue per that customer divided by your churn, and by that, using that formula, you can get to the long-term value of your customer. And an investor might be measuring that versus your cost of acquisition. So what are the marketing costs and the cost of goods sold or service sold that go into you acquiring and servicing that customer? And they'll be doing a division of your LTV over your CAC. Now, typically for a venture-backable business, you want an LTV of something like 10. And that means that in theory, every dollar that you put into your business is going to generate $10 worth of growth. Versus if you're at scale, maybe an LTV of around LTV to CAC ratio of around 3 is healthy. So that's typically asked for at the later stages, because at the early stages, it's probably that you're not spending a lot of money on marketing and sales. Mm-hmm. And again, when you're getting early product market fit, you want to be able to demonstrate that you've got loads of customers without you even needing to spend loads of money on on sales and marketing. But yeah, LTV over CAC is another measure that may be used.
And then the last of measures, the ones that are more fun, are the vanity metrics.
Oh, the vanity metrics are the ones that you should avoid. So often when I'm speaking to founders and founders are pitching, there are some metrics that they tell me is a way to try and get me impressed. So for example, they might tell me their cumulative sales, which is probably a big number. Or they might tell me the number of followers they have on their social media. Or they might tell me how many users they have. Or they might, if they're a marketplace, tell me their gross merchandise value. All of these are vanity metrics, and if you're speaking to someone that kind of knows what they're doing in terms of investing, they will ask you more details. Why? Because those metrics aren't necessarily related to the value of your business. If you think about something like social media followers, it's really easy to buy social media followers, mm-hmm. and it's not necessarily that your media followers convert into paying customers. If you think about something like cumulative sales, great, it's going to go up, right? Because your sales can't go down. So it's not an impressive measure. What we're really looking for as investors is growth. And then the big one I see all the time, users, the total number of users. But then the question I have to ask is, okay, how many of them are active? And quite often, an early stage startup can get loads of users. You're new, you can do some social media campaigns, you get loads of users. But the question is, what percentages of them are converting, and then what percentage of them are active, continuously using you? So I'd say something like users, yes, put it in your deck, but be prepared to really speak about active users, and be prepared to, I would say it's probably a better one to use. Mm-hmm. And then the last one I said was, yes, this gross merchandise value, or for payments companies, it's often gross transaction value, so the amount of money that goes through the platform. And you can get some really impressive companies. So, for example, payments company in Nigeria recently told me that they transact something like $30 million. $30 million a month. Sounds like a huge number, right? They must have product market fit. They must have great traction. But then you ask them, what's the margin on that? And it's tiny. It's like a couple $1,000s. Why? Because they're a payments company that relies on alternative data measures. For them to get the alternative data, they have loads of APIs feeding in to get the data they need. So APIs into the credit bureaus or APIs into other banks. So it's really expensive. And then the margin they actually make is 0.0 something percent. Yeah. So GMV, GTV, vanity metrics.
Very nice press releases, but that's about it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. This morning you were talking about testing your product market fit, or your assumptions towards product market fit, no? And you used some interesting examples from let's say a company that today is very well established, Airbnb, no?
Yeah.
And how with very little cost you are able to test the assumptions that you're doing to see if you have a product market fit.
Yeah.
Could you go back on that, because it's really
Yeah, sure. So we were talking about Airbnb, or bed and breakfast as they were called back in the day. So the story behind that, I think the founders were running out of money or something, so they needed a way to generate some quick money, so they were looking to rent
as any founder.
I think they weren't founders at the time, actually,
Okay.
at least of Airbnb.
Okay.
Maybe they were students or something, but they were young people running out of money, and were looking for a way to make value from what it was that they had. So they had this idea to rent out their room. And then they thought, there might be a business here. So they actually, again, in my language, ran a series of tests to validate whether or not there was a business here. So the first thing they had to ask themselves is, would a person be willing to stay in someone else's home rather than a hotel? Right? And it was actually a really weird concept. I don't know if anyone was kind of around, again, early days of Airbnb. It was actually a really weird concept, the idea that you're going to sell your room and someone will actually stay. So what they did is they built a really budget website, and you can Google the website, and it's really budget, where they listed their home to some people that were coming in for a local event to see whether or not they were willing to stay in a stranger's home. And the result was yes, they managed to actually get a couple of bookings. So that's one example of a quick, cheap test that they did. But then there are two-sided market, right? So there was another question that they had to validate, and that's the question of, would people that own homes be willing to put their homes on the market for strangers to stay in? Again, it was like a really weird concept. But I remember being like, no, I remember thinking myself, no one's going to use this. But they validated it was correct. And how did they do that? Again, they mocked up a quick website. They went to a few people in the area, asked them, would you be willing to give up your room? And it was the time of the Democratic National Convention.
In a very specific area.
In a very specific area.
In a town for a specific event.
Exactly.
No?
Very specific time, very specific location even. They brought in a new map feature where the visitors could see how close the houses were to the event. And they apparently then became like a good supplier of homes during that convention. So they were able to validate the other side of the market. They also had this question that they wanted to ask, where they were asking, okay, is there a way that we can increase conversion? If we have really fancy photos, are people more likely to use or to buy a place to stay? So they hired a contractor photographer, they took some fancy photos, and they then ran a test to see whether or not those homes would convert more than the others. And they got something like a 3 times return, right? They could see that once the homes had a fancy photo, they were able to do 3 times more the sales. So yeah, these are, I think, just great examples of cheap and quick tests that they were able to run. Again, it's really expensive to launch a great product without knowing customers want it. They were able to do that as a way to demonstrate early product market fit.
Continuing with that, when they arrived, at least in Spain, when Airbnb came to Spain, what they offered the homeowners were free photos of their places, because they knew that it was a quick increase in sales for the homeowner and for them, of course, in a way. And it was very nice. Suddenly you had like really cool photos of your place, and worth it. We're running out of time. I think we can maybe go through one more thing that we were talking about before, and after we can open to questions. It's like the stages how do you discover users? No, how you go through different stages of user discovery, no, and how you identify the segments and so on. How do you what's the methodology behind that?
Sure. So the methodology for customer discovery.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you want to do it in a methodological way, because so when I started my startup, I think what we found is that we were just naturally doing customer discovery all the time. So my startup, as I mentioned, it was like a LinkedIn for Africa. We found that all of our friends actually were our potential customers. These were people in the diaspora that were looking for opportunities, and naturally we would just ask them open-ended questions to understand whether or not they had the same problem that we had, and if that problem was big enough, and if they were essentially willing to pay and buy for it. So there is kind of like an organic way of doing it, but if you want to do it in a, methodologically, is that a word? You know what I mean. Thank
Orderly.
you. Orderly. The stage one is typically around you trying to, you start with a hunch, right? We'll call that stage 0. So you start with a hunch, there's an idea, there's a problem, and you probably have some expectation of what the solution might be. So you have your hunch. The first stage you want to go through for customer discovery is figuring out the different types of customers that might have that problem. So brainstorm it, write it all down, write the different profiles of customers that might have the problem that you want, that you were trying to explore, and be as specific about it as possible. Because each different type of customer will probably talk about the problem in a slightly different way, and the solution might look a little bit different, and you want to understand who they are. So, for example, I run Techstars in Nigeria. Let's say that there was no Techstars in Africa, but I had a hunch the early stage founders in Africa have this problem where achieving product market fit. I might say, okay, there are different types of customer, different types of founders that I might want to go for. There might be this really early stage founder, straight out of university, that has an idea and has this crazy belief that they're going to become the next unicorn, and that's it. My next cohort might be a CEO founder. So they've actually launched a business, they're leading it. Maybe they have some traction, maybe they have raised less than $1 million in capital, and they're struggling to find product market fit. So I've got essentially my really idea stage startup versus my perhaps pre-seed startup. Those are different cohorts. So stage one is identify the different types of cohorts that you think might be your customer. And then go about trying to identify people in each of those cohorts. If you can't easily find 10 people in each cohort, or 10 businesses if you're a B2B business, then it's probably the wrong type of business. Because again, product market fit, you want to be able to have these customers growing organically without you needing to do a lot of customer acquisition. So if you can't find a lot of customers, it's already kind of like a dead end. So identify the cohorts. Identify individuals that you want to interview within those cohorts, so maybe 10 individuals per cohort. And then think about what it is that you want to talk to them about. So figure out what is that key problem or what is that key assumption that you really want to test, and identify some questions that you can ask to validate that. And really, you're prioritizing learning. So if you're going into these customer discovery interviews and you're like, I knew all of that already, I didn't learn anything, then you've wasted your time. You haven't prioritized learning. And one of the things that you can do to really avoid that situation is state all of your assumptions early on. So that's something that I think often gets lost in designing interviews. Like, state all of your assumptions early on, because what you don't want is you come out of an interview and you're like, I knew all of that. If you knew all of that, it's a waste of time. What you want to be able to say is, okay, this is what I thought would happen, this is what actually happened, and everything in between is learning, and that is so, so valuable. So state your assumptions, and then you go into your interviews. And some tips and tricks for the interviews: have 2 interviewees. So one person that's asking all the questions, another person that is just writing notes, observing, collecting feedback, watching, how someone responds, watching that, noting their facial expressions. Do they look calm? Do they look anxious? Picking up all of those nonverbal cues. And to pick up all of those nonverbal cues, it's best to do it in person. So try to do the customer interviews in person. If it's a B2B business, try and go to the physical location of that business, so they're actually in their environment and they can, really walk you through what they're doing and the challenge that they're having doing it. And record them if you can, so that you can really come back to them. And on the questions, make sure they're as open-ended as possible. It's really hard for founders to not lead, but you want to ask questions like, tell me about a time, or tell me about your experience. Not things like, wouldn't it be great if you use my products? Keep them really open-ended. It also encourages storytelling, which you want from the founders, because you want them to just the interviewee, because you just want them to talk, and in that process, you'll really get to see what are their motivations, what are their pain points, what are the things that you can really tap into.
Great. We'll continue with the open-ended questions now. Anybody on the floor who would like to come up? Sure, Joe.
Thank you so much. One question regarding of the MVP. Once I have the product market fit and the MVP ready, how can I add my feature slowly, without like adding too much to it, especially in the first phase, where I can create value to the customer that I'm targeting.
So I think the interesting thing about that kind of product market fit cycle is it doesn't need to stop when you've got product market fit. So you've got product market fit for a product with one or a couple of features, and you're now trying to add more features. Treat that as a new cycle that you're going through with the product market fit all over again. So don't start building, I mean, maybe you've got the capital to do so, but it doesn't mean you should. Don't start building unless you've got some kind of validation that it exists. So maybe your customers are telling you that there's one particular product or feature that they want. Or maybe in your continued customer interviews, because this should continue even at the growth stage, right? They're saying, okay, wouldn't it be great if X, Y, and Z? What I would encourage is that when you get customer feedback, you document it all, because it's very easy then for a product market fit founder to be like, this one customer said they really want this, let's go and build it. But if you've got everyone in your team collecting that feedback and collecting it in like an open document, you can then start to see what the trends are and then really tap into that. So the other piece I'd say is make sure that everyone in the organization, or everyone that has a customer-facing role or product-related role, is inputting into all the data points that you're gathering to figure out what your new feature is. Make sense? Yeah? Okay.
Sorry, to continue with that, would you encourage like A/B testing on this, like to go ahead on one part of the product?
If you can, cheaply and quick. Fastly is not a word. Cheaply and quick, I would encourage A/B testing. So if that's, I don't know how long it's going to take for you to build that new feature or tool, but absolutely. So A/B testing, I'm sure everyone knows what that is, but just in case, you're launching 2 different versions of the same thing and then giving it to different customers. So you launch feature A, give it to half your customers, you launch feature B, give it to the other half of your customers, and then you see what the uptake is. And actually, to be fair, you see this a lot with big companies. So, for example, recently I got a message from LinkedIn that said, hey, you're a premium user, we've got this new feature where there's a button that you can add and then they can go, I don't know, it's some new feature that they're trying to test, and they clearly have identified that I'm a cohort that they're interested in, probably based on my engagement and my use, and they're testing that product on me and no one else. Right, so yeah, big companies do this too.
And of course, you look at this with the eyes of somebody who comes from that world, from the product market fit
Yeah,
world, and you
like,
start
you're
analyzing
testing me.
what they're using me, no? And so on. Thank you. I don't know if there's any other questions.
We talked a lot about product market fit, so I want to hear your perspective. I think you built a startup before, so maybe you found it. I don't know. So could you tell us more about this?
Oh, yeah, okay. Did we? So as I mentioned, it was like a LinkedIn for, I say was, it still exists. Okay, so let me go through my metrics. Did we have exponential growth? So I would say we had exponential growth to begin with, but I would say it tapped out. But I think it tapped out because we didn't move the product fast enough, enabled to continue sustaining, continue with those customers. So what worked really well, we had really high retention, right? So the customers that were using us continued to use us, and they were quite forgiving of the fact that the product wasn't as operationally efficient as it should be. But for new customers that were coming and saying, hey, can we use your product, we weren't able to service them fast enough, and that went on for too long. So I would say that we probably had product market fit early on, so we had the exponential growth, we had the retention, we had the increasing average revenue per user, we had great, we did measure NPS, and we had great NPS. But then what we didn't do is we didn't capitalize on that, I think. We bootstrapped, and I think we were a victim of our own success. We were generating great revenue, we were profitable very early on, and I think what we really should have done is we should have gotten capital so that we could invest in growth, and we didn't do that. So I would say it was the business still goes on. That, and as I said, most startups don't achieve product market fit. But now what it is, it's a small to medium business, right? It's an SME. It's not a startup because it's not an exponential growth. It still employs something like 20 people. People have great jobs, they're making good money, but we don't have that exponential growth anymore. So I would say we're no longer in what I defined as product market fit. I hope that's helpful.
There's one more question at the back.
Question regarding the product market fit, because usually it's always said that you know when you get there, or you look at the numbers and you know that you're achieving product market fit looking at retentions or cohorts, etc. But it's kind of an elusive goal because you only know it when you reach there. So it's kind of a reactive sort of position that you're in. So any way that you think you could clarify on that, you know that you're getting closer to product market fit? Like, for example, if I'm hitting 10K revenue or 100K revenue, I know I'm getting there if I'm increasing my revenue and I'm seeing the number getting close to that finish line that I can see. But with product market fit, I can't see the finish line as clearly as it is. So I'm not sure that the activity that I'm doing right now, or the action that I'm doing right now, is actually getting me closer or further from that.
I would say it's interesting. We're doing this session on product market fit, but I would also say don't spend time every day saying, hey, we got product market fit yet. Instead, what you want to do is you want to figure out what those North Star metrics are, right? What those metrics are that are really important and demonstrate growth. And maybe it is, as you said, MRR, it's your monthly recurring revenue, but it's not just it's the speed of growth of that MRR, right? So I would say maybe that is one of your key metrics, but just so on one hand, make sure that the metric that you're measuring actually matters. So I'm sure you've all heard measure what matters. Make sure the metric matters, but just don't every day be thinking about, have I got product market fit? Like, just focus on those key metrics.
Thank you very much, everybody. I think we're going to wrap up for today. Thanks again for being here for our fireside chat. Thank you, Oyin. Hope to see you soon back. Thank you.